Family, family, family. It's the family, stupid. That is the foundation of any society. You know this, right? Well, if you don't, listen in, because this is a bold and blunt episode that you don't want to miss. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. I want to read you something. I saw this opinion piece. It's a guest essay written in the New York Times, just posted January 18th, so just a few days ago. And I was going to do a column on it, but I decided, you know what, it fits in really well with this podcast discussion, so I'm going to talk about it instead. China helped raise my American kids, and they turned out fine. That is the title of this guest essay written by Heather Kaye, Kaye. Don't know if I'm pronouncing your last name right or not, but there it is for you. And she said that she lived in Shanghai for 16 years, where she raised 2 daughters. And by the title of this essay, you can see she has a different world opinion than many in America, and my guess is all bold and blunt listeners. But before I get into all that, let me quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app. That is the online platform for your faith-based podcast. You can get Bold and Blunt at washingtontimes.com, where you may also subscribe to my 3 times a week newsletter. Comes out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Just go to the newsletter section, click on it, find my name, click on that, and sign up for my Monday, Wednesday, Friday newsletter containing all my commentaries that I write at the Washington Times, as well as my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcast, which, one more quick note, you can also get wherever podcasts are offered. Now, back to this New York Times piece. Let me read from this. When COVID was raging across the world a couple of years ago, I came across a picture online of an American woman wearing a t-shirt that proclaimed, "I refuse to co-parent with the government," a response to perceived government overreach regarding school mask mandates. I laughed out loud. My own kids were, in a way, co-parented by the Chinese government. She writes this as if this is a good thing, okay? She writes this as if this is something that all American parents should aspire to have the government co-parent. And hold on a few minutes, because as I read through this piece, you're going to find out that's exactly her point of view. It reminds me of Hillary Clinton. It takes a village to raise a child and so forth. You know what? It doesn't. It doesn't take a village. It doesn't take the government. It takes 2 caring parents. I suppose you can do it with 1 caring parent, or you can do it with 1 caring caretaker, right? But the ideal is, as God ordained, male and female, go forth and multiply. The ideal is a man, a father and husband, and a woman, the mother and wife, raising kids. Back to this piece. My work in the fashion industry took my husband and me to Shanghai in 2006, where we spent the next 16 years and started a family. In China, government co-parenting, listen up, begins in the womb. That's what she wrote. Chinese citizens have faced limits on how many children they were allowed under birth control policies that have since been relaxed. That's such a nice way to talk about China's one-child policy, which saw children, babies, the unborn, being murdered in mass across the country, as every family over there tried to have their one child allowed by government be a boy. But they've faced limits, is how she put it. Anyhow, back to the piece. People in China are still legally barred from determining the gender of their unborn babies unless medically necessary, because of a history of sex-selective abortions. There you go. They want boys, right? As foreigners, she wrote, we were exempt from such rules, but I had to accept that my growing belly had become community property, subject to unsolicited rubbing and sidewalk commentary, and that restaurants would refuse to serve me cold beverages. Chinese people ascribe medicinal properties to simple hot water rooted in hygiene concerns and the belief that it maintains a healthy balance in yin and yang. I dreaded the earful I would get each time I ordered an iced latte, though it was usually served with a warm smile. Well, isn't that nice? So Chinese feel quite open and comfortable about critiquing pregnant women's diets and drink choices and so forth. But at least they served this particular essay writer's iced latte drink orders with a smile. Back to this piece. In 2008 and 2010, we delivered 2 healthy daughters in Shanghai and faced the choice of all expatriate parents in China between pricey international schools and enrollment in local schools, overseen by the government and with an immersion in Chinese culture and values. Guess what? Seems a no-brainer, right? If you're overseas raising kids in China, you go for the schools that offer at least some sort of semblance of pro-America view. You don't go for the communist-run schools, but she did. This Washington Times essay author went for the government schools. We weighed the pros of the Chinese route. She writes, our girls would learn fluent Mandarin and hopefully a broadened worldview. You know what? Just a sidestep. That doesn't seem like much of a pro because other schools, right? It doesn't have to be communist-run schools. The pricey international schools, of which she referred, also offer languages, right? You could learn other languages. And you can also broaden your worldview by studying various histories of different nations and so forth. But back to this piece. And the cons, she writes the cons this way: exposure to Communist Party propaganda and potential social isolation of being foreigners in a group of Chinese students. Guess what? You had me at exposure to Communist Party propaganda. First off, you don't get exposed to it. You get soaked in it. You get bathed in it. You get shoved down your throat. There is no, well, let's discuss China and China's culture versus other world's cultures. Let's talk about China in terms of the global economy and explore all the politics and culture of all the other countries of the world in comparison with China. No, there is no exposure to Communist Party propaganda. You're either stuck with it, buried in it, soaked in it, bathed in it, or you're not. So, as she wrote, we took the plunge, meaning they went for the communist propaganda. They stuck their kids in schools, knowing that the schools were going to fill their little vulnerable minds with Chinese propaganda. All right. You know, parents' rights. All right. Back to this piece. Our stringent government co-parent. Government co-parent. Doesn't that turn your stomach right there? It really should. Our stringent government co-parent quickly made its presence felt. No duh. They're communists. There is no co-parenting here. It's the communist way or no way. Back to the piece. The girls' Chinese kindergarten lectured us on everything, including how many hours our daughters should sleep, what they should eat, and their optimal weight. Wow, this sounds like Michelle Obama's dream vision for public schools. Remove all the salt and make sure all the kids are sleeping 8 hours a night. That's the government's role, according to Michelle Obama and the communists. Each morning, this New York Times guest contributor writes, each morning, all of the students performed calisthenics in straight rows and raised China's red flag while singing the national anthem. How can you be an American citizen and allow your children to do that? How can you put your children in such a spot? How can you, as American parents, stomach the idea of that? Unbelievable. Classroom windows, she writes, were usually kept open to increase air circulation and prevent contamination by airborne illnesses, even during winter, when the kids would attend class wearing their coats. Look, I want to jump to the side once again here because in the pandemic, right? At the very beginning of the pandemic, wasn't it Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates and all the big medical bureaucrats that were working hand in hand with big pharma and big government to tell us all to get off the streets, get out of the parks, get off the beach, stay home, huddle inside with your family. Don't even open the windows. When that counters everything that most Americans were told as young kids, get outside, get some fresh air, get your immune systems going, breathe in the fresh air, sleep at night with the windows open to keep the circulation going. You know what? Even the communists know this. The communists from the country where the Wuhan virus originated. The communists know this and have kids in classrooms with windows open so they breathe the fresh air. Back to this piece. There's so much to discuss here. We sometimes felt as if our children were on loan to us for evenings and weekends to be delivered back to school each weekday. I'm going to read that again. This is a parent. This is an American parent talking about the experiences of her children when they lived in communist-run China and her children were in communist-run schools. We sometimes felt as if our children were on loan to us for evenings and weekends to be delivered back to school each weekday. They're not my children. They're the government's children. I get them at night to tuck them in and make sure they get 8 hours sleep and do their calisthenics in the morning. But other than that, the government owns them. And what's more, she's talking about this as if it's a good thing. Over time, she writes, the very next sentence, over time, the benefits kicked in. The benefits kicked in. Think of that. She writes that right after talking about how she felt like her children were on loan from the government to her and her husband on evenings and weekends. Over time, the benefits kicked in. Constantly served up moral history and culture lessons on pulling together for the sake of the Chinese nation. In a word, that's called collectivism. Our girls came home discussing self-discipline, integrity, and respect for elders. With school instilling a solid work ethic and a total drive for academic excellence, my husband and I didn't need to push the girls to complete homework. The shame of letting their teachers and classmates down was enough to light their fires. Isn't that nice? These parents love how the government took over their duties as parents. Take them. We'll take them at night and on weekends and maybe on down the line, not even then. The prevailing student-centered American approach, this New York Times guest opinion writer writes, to education emphasizes the needs of the children and what engages them and, get this, promotes independent thought. Well, yeah, that's because America is a nation of individualism compared to China, a nation of collectivism. That's the difference. China stresses that you can succeed as long as you obey your teachers and work hard. Comply, comply, comply. It's like Klaus Schwab whispering in the background. Comply. You will own nothing and be happy. To celebrate Chinese culture, this writer writes, and offer an alternative to Western influences, government-funded events were always on offer, like traditional musical performances, operas, and plays. At times, our girls would repeat propaganda or, concerned about keeping up with their peers, despair that we hadn't tutored them earlier in math. At the end of the day, our less demanding American family culture helped keep the balance. So, what's she saying? America, second best, kind of smoothed out her daughters' attitudes of excellence, of striving for excellence that China, communist China, put in their minds? I don't know. But the whole tone of this piece, pro-China, much better than America. Not exactly anti-America, but just about. Pro-China, pro-communist China, pro-communist public school systems China. It turns my stomach. And then she goes on to say, raising kids in China was a plus in other ways. A plus in other ways. Get this. This is a plus. Such as the heavy censorship, which results in a kid-friendly internet and national limits on how many hours young people can spend playing online video games. She's happy that the government takes over the job of the parents. So she doesn't have to play the big bad mommy, limiting her daughter's access to the internet or limiting how many hours they can spend online playing video games. No. She doesn't have to do that. She doesn't have to put her foot down and be the rule maker, be the disciplinarian, be the, oh, get this, mother. In her mind, it's a benefit that communist China does that, takes on that role for her. It makes her life easier. Ironically, there's no way to shorten this. There's really no way just to read the highlights of this piece. You got to read the whole thing because it's just astonishing from beginning to end. So I'll try and read quickly. We're almost done. Ironically, the tight control of the Communist Party's surveillance state results in its own kind of freedom. Did you catch that? The surveillance state brings about freedom. With crime and personal safety concerns virtually eliminated, our daughters were riding the subway unsupervised in a city of around 26 million people from the age of 11. Guess what? You can accomplish the same thing if you remove all Democrat leadership from cities in America. Then we would have much safer streets, and kids as young as 11 could ride the subways. But leftists like these people, leftists like this writer in the New York Times, thinks that it's the guns that are the problem, or it's Republicans that are the problem. They never look inward. They never look at the fact that it's their own policies, the government itself, that is causing these problems. In America, safety problems, gun problems, security problems are largely seen in areas that are controlled tightly by Democrats. Look at Chicago. That's just one example. Look at Washington, D.C. There's another. Look, they're going to keep rolling off my tongue unless I get going on this. The pandemic, she continues to write, laid bare cracks in the system. The punishing COVID lockdown of Shanghai that began in late March last year kept us confined at home for 2 months, dependent at times on government food rations. We had already made the difficult decision to leave China after nearly 3 years of being unable to see our families, largely because of Chinese pandemic restrictions, largely because of communist China restrictions. So they moved to Washington, D.C. in June. In some ways, she went on, the culture shock coming home feels stronger than when we first arrived in China. La-di-da, I'm going to skip to the last couple paragraphs here. There is no shortage of condemnation directed at China's Communist Party by critics in the United States, much of it justified. Well, isn't that nice? She throws us a bone for hating communists. Wow. My family's experience in China, she goes on, taught us that immersion in a culture with different answers to everyday questions alters how one sees the world. That's such a strange way of putting a difference of looking at a world when you live in freedom, like in America, versus when you live in tyranny, like in China. It's just a culture with different answers. No, it's communism. It's evil. It's soul-sucking, soul-stealing collectivism evil. As an American parent in China, this is the last paragraph, I promise, I learned to appreciate the strong sense of shared values and of people connected as a nation. Parenting, like governing, is an imperfect art. Those two things really shouldn't be compared, because parenting is parenting and governing is upholding a constitutional system, upholding law and order. Very different from parenting, which involves a lot more than just law and order. Parenting, for instance, involves instilling a moral compass and virtues and principles and so forth in the youngest of a nation. Anytime government tries to get involved instilling morals and virtues and principles in the youngest, we end up heading down a path of moral decay, as my guest today is about to highlight. But let me just finish this really quickly. Parenting, like governing, is an imperfect art. Priorities must be set and tough choices made. There's never been a more crucial time for us to learn from one another and build new bridges across the street, nation, and world. Attention to the common good is a fundamental value I seek in an American government co-parent. There is a phrase I never want to hear again in my life: American government co-parent. As a parent, I want the government to get the you-know-what out of my parenting actions, decisions, behaviors. As a parent, the government needs to back off. I don't want an American government co-parent, and any patriotic American citizen, any patriotic American parent ought to feel the same way. Get the government out of parenting. And I have a guest today who is going to highlight exactly what happens when the government gets involved with parenting. Can you say drag queen shows? Can you say sexualization of the youth? Kimberly Ells, she has a new book called The Invincible Family, Why the Global Campaign to Crush Motherhood and Fatherhood Can't Win. And she's here now on Bold and Blunt to talk about these issues. Kimberly, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
I'm intrigued by the title of your new book, The Invincible Family, Why the Global Campaign to Crush Motherhood and Fatherhood Can't Win. What is the global campaign?
Well, I've spent the last 10 years involved at the United Nations and here locally as well, kind of witnessing what's happening in regard to policy and the family. And I've really been shocked and concerned about what I've witnessed firsthand. And I didn't understand until I became involved globally that there really is a campaign to crush the family, to try to convince the world that the family is antiquated, it's not needed. Moms, babies don't really need their mothers. The state could essentially take care of all of our needs. And so that's what I've been seeing over the past decade.
So what exactly did you do at the United Nations?
Well, I became involved with a group called Family Watch International. They have been advocating for many years to protect children and families at the UN specifically, and I have joined forces with them on certain projects over the years, and our focus has been, one of our areas of focus has been protecting children from early sexualization, particularly from comprehensive sexuality education and other forms of sexualization and being exposed to harmful ideologies.
Now, in America, I think parents' eyes have been opened in the last 2 to 3 years, mostly due to the coronavirus and the ability to see firsthand what they're being taught, what their kids are being taught in school. And I think family as a cultural issue has taken front and center with many in America. But you're saying that it's not just in America the family is being attacked, but it's coming from something outside of America, from the globalist forces. Could you explain?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, it's a complex issue. Of course, there's many forces at work, but what my message is that there is a global effort to push these kind of sexual ideologies on children in an effort to erode the family and to get children to think of sex as just a fun activity, not a family-building activity. And so, and you're absolutely right. In the last couple of years, I think it's been shocking to most parents to see what kind of content is being kind of trotted out in our schools. But the thing is, it's globally based. There's major entities, UNESCO being one of them. It's the United Nations agency who has taken it upon itself to kind of guide the education efforts of the world. And one of they have many problematic areas of focus, but the one that I take aim at specifically is their sexual content. And they're in a document that they revamped just a few years ago. It's called the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education. And their whole philosophy that they put forward in that is that children have sexual rights. And here's a quote from that document. Children should have, quote, agency in their own sexual practices and relationships. And then they go on to say comprehensive sexuality education can, quote, help children form respectful and healthy relationships with sexual partners, plural. And so it's not hidden. These ideologies are out there in an official form, being pushed by United Nations agencies and, of course, other entities across the world. So we see this coming into our schools, and we think, oh no, where has this come from? Well, it's been growing for many years, and we're just now starting to see the really terrible fruits of that in front of the eyes of our children.
So how do they define in that policy, in that guidance that you just quoted, how do they define children? I mean, do they put ages around that?
Not specific. It depends on the document, but they use the term young people, and they say children, and they say that, for instance, another document from Planned Parenthood Federation, who I've learned has quite a large seat at the table at the United Nations. They say, this is from one of their documents, sexuality and sexual pleasure are important parts of being human for everyone, no matter what age, no matter if you're married or not, no matter if you want to have children or not. And then it concludes, governments and leaders have a duty to respect, protect, and fulfill all sexual rights for everyone.
Wow.
This is for everyone. And so that doesn't include any limitations on age, and that is intentional.
It just seems evil to me. I mean, and I'm sure there are plenty in America who would label that similarly. Is that how you take it as well?
Absolutely. It strikes at the very heart of what we all hold dear. I mean, the value of human life and the creation of human life is totally set aside, if not demolished, in this kind of ideology. When we begin to teach our children that sexual intercourse is only for your personal pleasure and perhaps the person's pleasure who you're having it with, and we discount totally the fact that sex is the thing that creates human life, and then that if human life is accidentally created, that you can just exterminate it, therefore making women, destroyers of life instead of creators of life. It's hard to think of a better word than evil, the word you described to describe what it is. When we're telling kids, this is just for fun, all you need is consent, just say yes, and then have at it, we're so underselling them the beauties that life has to offer, and the fact that sex is there to build families in the first place and then keep them together so that mankind can be raised in a stable family environment. And so, yes, it is extremely problematic and yes, evil.
See, what you describe as the assault on the family, right, and the abuse, really, of kids by teaching them that sex is just another fun event like going to the movies, I see at root as an assault on God, as an attack on godly principles. Do you see that in any way?
Yes, absolutely, because, of course, God, as the creator, He's the one who designed our bodies. He's the one that designed sex, and it's purposeful. And He's also the one that designed male and female categories, and they're meant to be cooperative and complementary. And when we teach things that are in opposition to that, we stand in opposition to what God has created. Even if our doctrines may differ here and there, but the fact is, bodies are built in a certain way, and God did that on purpose. And so if we're trying to escape that or change that, we're trying to undo something that can't be undone and that God intended to stay in place.
It's also an attack on womanhood. Look at how women are being redefined and how men can become women overnight by wearing skirts and so forth. And you looked into this in your book as well, yes? And it's coming from the United Nations type of agenda?
Again, that's part of comprehensive sexuality education. It's an expanding part of that. A kind of instruction now is to teach gender ideology. In fact, there was a education summit just a few months ago at the United Nations in which one of the participants advocated that gender theory should be taught to children beginning at age 2.
Wow.
And she said, we all know it's just a social construct. We need to early on get in there and share with children the possibilities that are open to them beyond, quote, the binary, which is, of course, in opposition to reality and to nature and to God's design of the world. And so, yes, absolutely.
In America, it seems to me there's this perception that the LGBTQ agenda, which includes what you've covered in your book, The Invincible Family, there's this perception that it's being driven by just a small percentage, maybe 2 or 3% of the population. But when you add the UN pressure into it, it seems a lot larger than 2 or 3%.
Mm-hmm. And, on some level, that may be true that there are large financial backers driving the transgender movement and some of these other movements. But like you say, all the nations of the world are essentially paying into the United Nations, and they have, a budget billions of dollars strong. And so the things that they decide to push and emphasize, it makes a huge difference. And a lot of times we don't see that global hand pushing, but it really is, and a lot of times that's monetarily and policy and through various programs that are then implemented throughout the world, often in the name of womanhood, but that are really trying to change at the very core what we believe about life and humanity, and it is global.
And then this evil just bleeds into the science community as well, because as you discovered, there is a redefining of what used to be taken as common sense science. And now we have this politicized science out there pushing the far leftist vision and the wicked vision of this LGBTQ agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's becoming less and less scientific. They're trying to stand on the legs of science, but in the case of transgenderism, and I should make the point that we always say LGBT, plus, but the gay agenda and the transgender agenda are fundamentally different, and I explain that in more detail in a whole chapter in the book. But we need to separate. We need to separate those things, because transgenderism is entirely different than homosexuality. It's a totally different argument, different underpinnings. They go in different directions, and so we need to recognize that, so that we can then, if we separate them, then we can begin to see them for what they are and the unscientific nature of transgenderism. There's no diagnosis for transgenderism other than the person's thoughts and feelings. Not that people's thoughts and feelings aren't important, but that is not a scientific diagnosis. And in no other case that I'm aware of do we simply ask people, especially children, how they feel about things, and then prescribe not only medicines, but surgeries to solve the problem. Irreparable surgeries. It just seems beyond the pale. I think most people, even 5, certainly 10, but even maybe 5 years ago, most people on both sides of the political aisle, if asked if they thought that children's breasts and genitals should be cut off routinely, they would probably have said no. But now we suddenly find ourselves in this situation where that's being pushed as the norm.
Yeah, it's a very rapid switch. And you have an interesting perspective because you worked within the United Nations for a decade. So I wonder, based on what you saw and the people that you interacted with, do the people who are pushing this sexualization of children agenda, do they truly believe that they are doing some sort of human good, or do they know they're just wickedly, evilly pushing an evil, wicked agenda?
I will say, from most of my experience, I think most of the people believe they are actually doing good. So often we hear the argument that, we can save young people's lives if we just affirm them. And we all want to save young people's lives. And so the problem is that that's not supported by virtually any data. And I address that in the book. The scientific data does not indicate that, confirming, so-called affirming transgenderism saves lives. That's just simply not the case. But it's persuasive because, people who have a good heart want to save children. And so, yes, I think by and large, most of the people actually think they are doing good. I think there's a small percentage of people who really are out to, guess you could say, destroy the world and turn upside down our society by changing sexual norms and all that. There certainly is an element of that, but I think most people think they're doing the right thing.
Wow, that's astonishing to me when you look at the morality, or actually the immorality of what they're pushing. I mean, to really truly believe that you're doing good and be that immoral, it's astonishing.
It is.
So let's just finish up with this last question here. Knowing all that, and people who read your book, The Invincible Family, why the global campaign to crush motherhood and fatherhood can't win, and educating themselves on what you found, the findings that you uncovered, how can people effectively fight?
Right, because we have to fight this, and there's a few things, and the first thing sounds like, oh yeah, well, of course, but no, it's the first thing we have to do, and it's the most important, and that is to teach our own children consistently in the home the things we believe about sex, gender, and the family. We have to be doing that. We have to be having those conversations, and there's opportunities to talk about it all the time now, and so we need to do that. We need to find out where we stand, and we need to teach our children, regardless of what they're being taught, regardless of what culture is telling them. And we do need to be strong and loving in the ways that we do that. We just absolutely have to do that. We need to teach chastity and the value of human life to our children. And they'll believe us. They'll believe us because we love them and because what we're saying is true. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes our children will make choices we don't agree with. They certainly will. But we can fortify them better than anyone else as parents and grandparents and its families. The other thing we need to do, policy-wise, is to get sexual rights organizations out of schools. Any organization that pushes an agenda of sexual rights, especially for children, should not be in schools. And, of course, Planned Parenthood comes to mind. And then we need to oppose comprehensive sexuality education in any way we can. I would advise people to go to stopcse.org, and there's a host of information there, both about comprehensive sexuality education and how to fight it in your area. So those are some places where we can start.
Those are great points. See, and I especially like you bringing up the one about the importance of caretakers, family members talking to their children about moral issues and making it clear what the family is supposed to represent in terms of morality, not the culture, not the government, and so forth. That's something that I think a lot of people don't understand the power of. So I appreciate you coming on Bold and Blunt. I appreciate you speaking with me and laying out these points. And I appreciate you writing The Invincible Family. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Family, family, family. It is the foundation of American society. In fact, it is the foundation of any society. As the family goes, so society goes. Society meaning, of course, politics and culture. If you like Bold and Blunt, remember, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for faith-based podcasts. You can get Bold and Blunt at Washington Times, or you can get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. I appreciate you listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.